like this.
So this week we are going to be covering the lives of 3 people specifically. All 3 of them highly influential in the position that basically God placed them to be at. So who do you guys think we're going to be talking about today? Take a guess. It's a woman.
Oh.
Ester.
Yes.
No. Who?
So Esther, and we have titled the series Before the Throne. Okay, so we're gonna be looking at today the life of Esther. Tomorrow we're gonna be looking at the life of Daniel. Joseph tomorrow.
Gracias por contar la película entera.
And then we're going to be looking at the life of Daniel last. Okay. So today, for the girls and for the boys, we're gonna have a quick recap. How many of you have read the story of Esther? Okay. So I have to do a little bit of recounting as possible as I can. It's only 10 chapters, so I really do encourage you guys to read it. It's a beautiful story, and it's got a lot of intricacies, a lot of cool plots. It's almost like a movie. They've made actually a lot of movies out of this story. So let's dive in. So I want to give you guys a little bit of a background intro to the story, okay? So basically it's taking place 100 years after the Babylonian exile, okay? So remember that the Israelites were taken captive by the Babylonians, and then at some point, then the Assyrians take over, and then eventually the Persians take over. So this is happening during the Persian Empire, okay? So, and it is happening outside of Jerusalem. It's actually happening in Susa Citadel, which is the center capital place of Persia, okay? And Persia, who knows what modern day Persia is? Just a quick.
Turkey?
Close, but not really. It's actually Iran, okay? Persia is modern day Iran. So we're starting to read the story. We come across this king. His name is Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, known by in other cases. And he is a very extravagant king, and he throws banquets, and he's always feasting. And the story basically opens up in the middle of this huge banquet that he's throwing for all people of the city. And then he throws it, and that one was like 180 something days or something like that. It's like half a year. Feasting, and then he throws another like mini banquet 7 days long for like the elite, okay? And on that very last day, he calls his queen Vashti to be presented, in front of him, and she refuses. And because of the laws present in Persia at that time, they basically could do just about anything with this poor woman. And what they decide to do is to basically kind of like disown her, just kind of take her outside of the throne, and then I guess los sabios, like the wise, the consejeros, counselors of the king, tell him, you know what, you gotta, put a request out there for all the beautiful women in the land to basically come, and it kind of was like a beauty pageant. Like it literally was like pick your favorite, and that's gonna be your new wife kind of thing. So we are presented with, her name is actually, her Hebrew name is Hadassah, also known as Esther, okay? And Esther is the cousin of Mordecai, okay? And Esther is presented without parents, so we know that she's an orphan. She doesn't have parents, so we don't know exactly what happened. We don't know that much into it, but we know that her father figure is Mordecai. And he is, technically, we know that he's older than her, so people would kind of confuse it and say like he's like an uncle, but they were actually cousins, okay? So there's no mention again of her parents, and then in the middle of this whole kind of like chaos, the king is getting out there to get women to come to his court so that he can pick a queen. Esther becomes one of the girls that gets chosen. She was, according to the Bible, very beautiful in form and appearance to look at. It's more or less what the Bible says. So fair enough, she goes into, and there was a huge ritual as far as like beautifying rituals that they would do to get these women ready. But what we do know is that she becomes basically like the favorite for King Ahasuerus, okay? So she does in fact get chosen. I'm not gonna go into the details of, you know, the ins and outs, but basically she finds favor in his presence, and he decides to make her queen, okay? Unbeknownst to the king, Esther is what? What do we just say that happened to Israelites, and why were they in? Because of exile, they were not in Jerusalem, but they didn't know she was a Jew. So on behalf of Mordecai, her cousin, he tells her, do not tell them that you're a Jew, okay? And again, we don't know exactly why that happens, why he tells her to not reveal herself, but that's just kind of the way it goes. And at the end, again, of the process of selection, she does in fact get chosen. This is from a part of the movie. You guys haven't seen the movie. It's a very pretty movie. I think it's...
Una noche con el rey.
Yeah, A Night with a King. Which was basically how she became queen. All the ladies had to go in before the king, and then he would take his pick, kind of thing. Kind of weird, but that's how it went down. So the first conclusion that I kind of come across when I look at, you know, this very first part of her story is Esther didn't have a perfect background. You know, like we know that she's an orphan, so she doesn't have parents. So we don't know exactly what the circumstances are, but they're probably not ideal. They're not the most ideal circumstances for a young woman, you know? She doesn't have a mother figure to look, you know, to. She doesn't have a father figure to look to. The best she's got, and I'm sure he did a great job at it, was Mordecai. But again, the situation, she's in exile, so she's away from, you know, her Jewish family. So not great. But our circumstances, even though there can be less than ideal, God can transform them for good, okay? Because then we see how she was kind of sovereignly guided by God to get to this super high position of honor, really. And we're going to see that it was a position of power, too, that allowed her to do a lot of things for her people. So the main thing that I want you guys to gather from this part of the story is that God is sovereign, okay? And our past doesn't necessarily dictate our future, okay? Only God knows our future. So I want you guys to kind of gather that first aspect of it as we move into the next section, which is where we read a little bit of a parallel story to Esther, okay? So Mordecai and Esther both are protagonists of this story. So while Esther is doing all of this stuff and becoming queen and all of that, we have Mordecai on the other hand, and Mordecai is, the Bible says that he would travel a lot, like throughout he would go back and forth in the castillo, in the palace, okay? So he liked to check on Esther to make sure that she was okay, to make sure that, you know, things were good. And in one of those kind of like turnarounds, he overhears something, okay? He overhears, and this is just kind of like a side story. Again, the story is so rich, you guys have to read it. But he overhears a plot to kill the king from two of his counselors, they call them princes actually. So two of the most intimate circle from the king, they plot against them, okay? And Mordecai tells Esther, who in turn is gonna tell King Ahasuerus, and then that's how basically his life is saved. So Mordecai from the very beginning is already playing a very influential role in this story, okay? But then we find kind of like the antagonist, okay? So the bad guy in this whole story, and his name is Haman, okay? And Haman is actually basically like a second in command to King Ahasuerus, okay? And the problem with Haman was that he was actually a descendant of the Canaanites, okay? So he already has kind of like this built-in anger and hatred towards the Jews. And he finds out, so he goes out into the streets, and he's basically, the king tells everybody to proclaim him like a great whatever, like to pay homage and honor him. And guess who doesn't do it?
Esther.
No, not Esther. Mordecai. Remember, Mordecai, Esther is inside, kind of like in her little princess world inside of the castle. And outside of the castle, we got Mordecai kind of circling the castle, or the palace, whatever you guys call it. And he refuses to kneel and bow down to Haman, okay? So we have a descendant of Canaanites who does not like Jews, who finds out that Mordecai is in fact a Jew. So he doesn't only hate him for not kneeling to him, he hates him also for being a Jew. And then as a result of that, Haman decides that he wants to basically kill not only Mordecai, but all of the Jews, okay? So he starts this plot. He goes to the king, and he tells them that there's people in the city that are gonna, rebel against them because they don't have the same beliefs as they do, etc., etc. Elaborates this whole commotion, and then somehow manages to get the king to give him his signet ring to sign off on that edict to kill off all the Jews.
Oh my God.
Okay, so we're at this kind of like climax, like what's gonna happen kind of thing. And we have Haman's hatred and resolution to kill Mordecai. So here on the picture you can see, we can picture this is probably Haman. People are kind of like kneeling and paying homage to him, and here's Mordecai just kind of chilling on the side, like, I'm not gonna do it. Why do you guys think he wasn't gonna do it? What was stopping Mordecai from doing that? What do you guys think? Just didn't get it.
He bows to God.
Yes. Okay, so he is a Jew. Even though he's in exile, he's very much aware of who he's supposed to kneel down to. And it ain't Haman. Not even King Ahasuerus. So, the second conclusion that I come to when I see this part of the story is that sometimes we're going to come across people like that. We're going to come across Hamans. We're going to come across people that don't like us for being Christians. We're going to come across people that are going to do everything in their power. And if you haven't seen them, let me tell you, somewhere in your lifetime, it will happen. I'm just letting you know right now. So what I find in a story like this is how in the midst of so much chaos, where these people are not even in their land, and they don't really have to, they're not being seen by, the high-end Jewish, scribes and all these important people, the law, yet they choose to still honor only God, okay? So even though we could be in a deserted land, in a place where everybody around us disagrees with us, that doesn't mean that we don't get to stand up for what we believe in, okay? So I want you guys to take from this that there will be Hamans, and if it isn't a physical person, there will be circumstances. There's going to be difficult situations where you're going to have to make decisions, and you're going to have to pick whether to stand for your faith and your God or to give in, okay? And Mordecai decided not to, because, as Justin said, who deserves honor, homage, glory, worship?
Only God.
Only God does, okay? And now we get to the most beautiful part of the story, and I'm probably skipping a bunch of stuff in between because, again, we can't go into a lot of detail, but this is the part that kind of made us think about this little series for you guys, and it's the fact that Esther, or Hadassah, actually was just kind of, we think, coincidentally placed in a position of power. But what we realize is that, was it really coincidental? So there's a very fun fact about Esther. Who does not get mentioned in the book of Esther, ever?
God.
Yes. So the actual name of God and the actual person of God is not really revealed or spoken about anywhere in the book of Esther. Yet what we see is that from the beginning of the story, there is a way that things are happening, and it isn't coincidence. people that do not know God would credit it as coincidence, but what we do know is that it's God kind of molding and shaping and bringing a particular person to be part of his purpose. Does that make sense? So we have Mordecai and the Jews being sentenced to death by Haman. And then we have Esther in a position of power who could technically talk to the king and intervene, correct? You would think. But guess what? It wasn't that easy. If you weren't summoned by the king, you couldn't just go up and be like, yo, I need a little help. My people are gonna get killed, and you gotta do something about it. So the law actually stated that if any person approached the inner courts of basically the throne place of the king without being summoned, without being called, they were automatically sentenced to death.
Even though it's like, if it was like an emergency.
So here's the other part. So the only way that that became annulled is if the king extended his scepter. So kind of like una vara que tenía, his magic wand. He extended it to the people or the person, and then that's how that person would not be killed. But anybody who would go would have to kind of risk their life. You know, they had no certainty. So Mordecai, now all of a sudden, after telling Esther, do not reveal who you are, now what does he do? He asked her, you know what? You need to talk to the king. And it is you or someone else. Someone's going to do it because God will deliver the Israelites. So he had a lot of faith and he believed that it was going to happen. But he tells her this, and this is probably my favorite verse, and it could probably be applied to the rest of everything that we're going to be covering the rest of this week. And it's Esther 4:14. Does somebody actually have the Bible and want to read the whole thing? It's a really nice verse. Somebody have it?
For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, and you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this.
So basically he tells her, who knows if this is precisely where God wanted you. So for this particular time, this is your time to shine, is what he's basically telling her. And in a very courageous statement, Esther responds, then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So we see the side of Esther that, wants to help her people. And she basically decides to put her life at risk. Because either way, if you think about it, and that's probably one of the conclusions she drew, if the edict went through, she was going to die either way, okay? Because they were going to kill all the Jews unless the king intervened. So in her mind, this is it. This is my time to go before the king. And that's exactly what she does. She goes before the king, and then, let me just double check. Okay. So let me tell you guys a little bit of the other side of the story. So she goes before the king. Remember, everybody, edict. Jews are about to get killed on the 13th day of Adar. You guys can look that up. It was a specific year, a specific day, where basically all of these people were going to go out and just massacre the Jews, okay? And then Esther goes before the throne. The king does in fact extend the scepter to her, and he asks her, like, what is it? Like, what is it that you want? I will give you to half of my kingdom. Like, he was in love with it. And then she tells them, well, I want you and Haman to come to a banquet, to a feast that I'm going to prepare for you guys. And then I will reveal there what I want from you. So fair enough, she prepares a feast, and she goes before the king and Haman. And I'm not sure exactly why she does that, but basically she gets them drunk. She gets them kind of happy, and then it kind of stops there, and then she tells them, well, actually not today, we're gonna do it tomorrow. And then I'm gonna prepare a second feast for you guys, a very special feast, and that's what I'm gonna reveal it. And then we know that from that first feast, as Haman is walking outside, he comes across Mordecai. And of course, the rage just kind of stares within him. And at that point, like, he doesn't care that he's second in command, that he's so famous, that, you know, literally he was second to the king. That wasn't enough for him because he wanted Mordecai to pay homage, and Mordecai didn't. And that just ate him alive. And his family didn't actually help him. His wife was very bad and mischievous, and she was like, well, you need to kill him or you're never gonna be happy, basically. And his friends advise him the same thing. So he tells them that same night to put up, I think the name is gallows, like a hanging place, to hang Mordecai. And then the next day, he was gonna go to the king and tell the king that, well, Mordecai did this, did that, I don't like him, he's a Jew, I'm gonna hang him, kind of thing. But parallel to that, King Ahasuerus is having a dream. And what do you guys think he was dreaming about? Or what did he remember? Or not a dream, he couldn't fall asleep. He couldn't fall asleep, so he tells somebody to read the Chronicles to him. And the Chronicles are old and boring and put him right to sleep. But they actually are reading coincidentally from the fact that Mordecai saved his life at a particular instance, and nothing was ever done to Mordecai. So no homage was paid to Mordecai for saving the king's life. And he wakes up and decides that he wants to honor Mordecai. Okay? So as Haman is going to him to tell him that he's going to hang Mordecai, the king is going to ask him, well, there's this person, and it's super, super fabulous. Like, the way that the story is, it's just great, and that's why it's like perfect for a movie. Because the king asks him, well, there's somebody, but he doesn't tell him who, that I want to honor. And of course, Haman, with his big fat head and his ego up to the sky, thinks that it's him. But it isn't him. It's in fact Mordecai. So he starts telling the king, because the king asks him, so what should we do for this person that I want to honor? And of course, he goes all out. And he starts telling him, I want you to get, the most beautiful horse that the king has ridden, and put on robes that the king has worn, and just pasealo por toda la ciudad to make sure that that person receives the proper honor. And guess what? The king turns to him and tells him, all right, go do so to Mordecai. Just as you have said, do not skip one single detail from everything that you have told me. So in a very ironic turn of events, Mordecai, who was supposed to be hung, all of a sudden is getting exalted by his worst enemy. And the second feast comes around. Esther sits down with Haman once again and the king, and Esther tells the king, well, as a matter of fact, there is someone who wants to kill me. There is someone who wants to kill my people. I am in fact a Jew, and that person is none other than Haman. And once again, a flip of events, the king got a little too drunk, he was a little too happy, and he tells his servants and stuff to go hang Haman on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. So, total flip there of the story. And what I find so amazing, and it's why I love this story, it's one of my favorite stories, is that God is in fact in the business of saving lives, saving his people's lives. He is sovereign, and he's going to determine things in ways that sometimes we don't understand. And there's gonna be crazy turn of events sometimes for the better of his people. And he is merciful. He always wants to preserve the life, but he also needs people that are willing to do so, okay? And he is going to guide our life to the right place, with the right people, at the right time, to complete his purpose in our lives, okay? And again, going back to that little side note that I told you guys, that God is never mentioned. He didn't need to be mentioned in the story. Like when you see the story from start to finish, you know that God is present. And what this story is trying to do is actually that same thing. It's trying to highlight God's sovereignty and God's providence for his people, where they might not see him fully, where he's not fully revealed in a way that might be easy for them to see. He was working and he was building things and setting things in motion that they couldn't even realize. So it makes me think that a lot of the times there are so many things that we're blindsided, like we can't really see what's happening. But from personal experience, because I've already seen it happen, and from a heart of faith that I know it will continue to do so, God has so mercifully built in my particular life things that I thought didn't make sense in my life, to then turn them for good. Remember Romans? So all things work together for good to those who
Love him.
love him, okay?